Aldous Huxley was an English writer and philosopher. He wrote nearly 50 books. And here's his quote about history. That men do not learn very much from the lessons of history is the most important of all the lessons of history. Welcome to the History Slices podcast, a mother-son duo discussing awesome bits of history. We prove on every show that history is not boring, entertaining, yet stimulating. This is History Slices. And now, here's your hosts, Jacob and Rachel.
Hello, Jacob.
Hello, Mom.
How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm really doing well. Pretty busy today. Good busy.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, better than bad busy.
Better than bad busy, yes. Hey, before we get into today's topic, which if I remember is Roosevelt.
Yes.
Honestly, can't remember which one, but
we'll talk about it. Don't worry.
Okay, good. I've heard from a couple of our listeners that they kind of could do without our intro. I wanted to put it out there to all of our listeners to get a little bit more feedback. If you would prefer to not have an intro and just have me and Jacob come in and say hello, please let us know.
Or conversely, a different intro.
Or maybe a different intro altogether. Maybe you don't like the one that we've got and you want us to get another one. So we'd love to hear your feedback on that. You can message us on Facebook, Instagram, or email us at info@historyslices.com. We don't want you to be annoyed by an intro, right? So
never say that we don't care for our audience.
But we'd love to hear from you. And whether or not it's about the intro, the outro, you just want to chime in and say, hey guys, how's it going? We would love to hear from you. So that'd be awesome too. But
absolutely.
Back to the matter at hand,
back
Jacob.
To Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt.
Theodore Roosevelt. Yeah. Okay. So I was thinking,
yes,
not that long ago this morning, I was thinking, okay, Roosevelt, that's who we're talking about today. There's Theodore and there's FDR. And I'm just going to, like, full disclosure, tell you what I know. It's going to take about 10 seconds.
Go for it.
About each one. So FDR is the one who came second.
Yes.
And he was like FDR, New Deal, coming out of the Depression, that guy.
Yes. Theodore
Roosevelt, all I really know about him is Rough Riders.
Yes.
And that's about it.
That's totally fine.
That's the base we're starting with today.
Well, that's great, because then this will be really educational, I guess.
Sweet.
Yeah. FDR. You know, just as a side note, because I'm curious, do you know what FDR's initials stand for?
Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Yes. Okay. I assumed you. Yeah. Confetti starts to come down from the ceiling. No, I assumed you knew, but you never know.
He's also the one who had he had polio or something.
He was in a wheelchair. It was one of those things that at the time they kept it all hush.
Right.
But now everyone knows because it got like declassified.
Okay. Whatever. That's right. Okay. I got my Roosevelts squared away.
They're actually cousins, the two of them.
Oh,
so
that's
where that relation
aren't
is.
They like how far apart? Like 100 years or something? No, not that far.
Not that far.
That'd be a really distant cousin.
Yeah, no, we'll get into the timing of it all. Let's just dive right in because I think it's interesting. Let's dive right in. So Theodore Roosevelt Jr. He was born October 27th, 1858 in New York City. So there's your timing there. Okay,
1858. I'm thinking I got to place it on my little mental timeline. That's right before the Civil War.
Yes, it's right before.
Okay, he was born right before. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. In New York City. His parents were named Theodore Roosevelt Sr., obviously given the Jr. in our Roosevelt's name.
Spoiler.
And his mother is named Martha Bullock Roosevelt. And the family had money. They weren't like lower class or anything. His dad was a well-to-do businessman. He really kind of left a mark on New York City, though it isn't always the most obvious. He founded some museums like the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
No kidding.
And the American Museum of Natural History. And he helped found the Children's Aid Society amongst other ventures.
Wow. He's a busy guy.
Yeah, he was. And I think that's interesting because usually the people we look at usually come from nowhere. Well, not nowhere, but they lineage, I guess. Is that the right word?
Mm-hmm, sure.
Parentage? I don't know. They're usually not that well known to history other than they're this famous person's parents, which I'm sure would be weird if they knew.
Your claim to fame? I birthed the famous person.
Yeah. I'm Vincent Van Gogh's dad or whatever. Yeah. So it's an interesting kind of like, what's the word? Subversion, I guess, of that kind of what we've been looking at. In that, no, his dad was already well known, at least in the city, was wealthy and stuff.
Cool.
Mm-hmm. Theodore was the second child. Theodore being the one that we're talking about, not his dad, of course. He was after his sister Anna, but before Elliot and Corinne. I think that's how you say her name. Now, Theodore, he was nicknamed TD as a kid, which is funny to me.
TD?
TD, yep. He was severely asthmatic to the point that his parents had given private tutors to him because he was unable to go to school. Now, despite all that, though, he was a very bright kid. He loved to read. He had an active imagination. He was also really into nature, something that would carry on throughout his whole life. He collected insects and whatnot, just because he was into that. And in order to try to help him get out of his asthma, or at least help, clear it up, or I don't know how asthma works. Full disclaimer. But, his mom would take him out on trips to the country, basically, to try to help with that. He also wrote in journals. He kept journals about different animals and plants and stuff he saw. Yeah. He even, this is kind of funny, and it's very much like something a kid would do. I feel like he made a makeshift, quote unquote, museum in his bedroom.
Well, that's really cool. Not too surprising since his dad was involved in museum making.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, but he just put like a lot of these are leaves and rocks and stuff I found, and here's some bugs.
I love that. Kids are awesome.
Yeah. Now, the thing you need to understand about being in the upper class in that time period was that you were expected to behave a certain way. I mean, obviously that's still true to an extent, but it was different then. The rules were different. Like, you weren't supposed to hang out with the lower class, for example. Like, you're kept on your side of the fence, so to speak. And you had to be very much like, your image was very much like you had to be polite and moral and refined, at least in public, because in private, who cares? And part of this role the upper class had to play was that every Sunday, right, they had to go to church. Obviously, the lower class did as well, but the upper class, it was, it's like a bit of a different affair. You dressed up. It was like a day-long thing, Theodore hated this, not because he was like anti-religion or anything, but he was a very much not a suit and tie type of a person. He was very much like, it was the one time he wasn't allowed to kind of be himself and kind of just be not a wild style, but like a rough and tumble outdoorsy kid.
Yeah.
Which I get. I mean, you shouldn't be selfish, and sometimes you have to do things you don't want to do because that's life. That's a social contract. But at the same time, I know how much of a drag it is to be somewhere you don't want to be and play a part. It's like when you're in a meeting or something, and you just like, I really don't have to be here. This doesn't really affect me. This is taking 2 hours.
That's so annoying when that happens.
Dull. Yeah.
And then add to that being buttoned up and got to wear a tie and scratchy pants.
And being a younger kid who has less patience just naturally, So anyways, an interesting event of note took place in 1869. He's 10 at this point. His family went on a 12-month vacation / trip to Europe.
Wow.
This is quite the venture.
Yeah.
But I guess they're rich, so they visited a bunch of different countries. They went to Italy, they went to Germany, they went to England, just kind of in that, Western Europe, and some others. And Theodore, he was not impressed. He said that both him and his siblings, this is a direct quote, cordially hated it.
Oh my gosh. I wonder how much of that is due to immaturity.
Yeah.
I mean, being 10, you're being slugged all over the countryside.
Staying at different places and stuff.
I could see why that might be, his response.
Yeah. Well, the thing about Roosevelt, and we'll get into it, but he went on a lot of different trips internationally throughout his life. So it wasn't that he was against traveling. I think that one was just a bad trip, I guess.
Okay.
That's fair enough.
Different kind of trip than Timothy Leary's bad trips.
I didn't even think of that, but yeah, man, to see those two sit down together, that'd be amazing. So when he was 13, Theodore Sr. gave his son a shotgun, which at the time was, I guess, more common.
Yeah.
It still is common in some parts, I guess. That's another thing. But Roosevelt, TD, he was a bad shot, which was pretty upsetting to him because his peers made fun of him because he's his reputation, you can't, aim or anything.
Yeah.
And he especially later on in life, but I think even at this early stage, he puts a lot of value in personal achievement and ability to overcome things. Well, he quickly figured out why he was struggling with shooting because his friend, or a friend, I should say, he gave him a chance to hit a billboard in a distance. He was nearsighted, and he realized that at that point, oh, that's okay. So what his dad did, he went and got him some glasses, and Theodore Roosevelt, he had a quote about this, and it's one that I relate to as a fellow glasses wearer, like on a deep spiritual level. No, he said, I had no idea how beautiful the world was until I got those spectacles.
Wow.
Which is true. Like, you put it on and suddenly everything's in high definition, so to speak.
Yeah. I think that's something that a lot of people who wear glasses and that first pair is like, wow.
Yeah, because I'm nearsighted too. I'm pretty sure. Anyways, his newfound sight led to an even greater fascination. I don't want to say obsession, though that might have been it, honestly, with the natural world.
Imagine that just opened it all up.
He started, because he would shoot at birds, right? Just because that was what you did with guns back then. And he would start practicing taxidermy on them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is interesting. I think taxidermy is kind of not to be on my soapbox. I think it's an interesting kind of like thing, but it weirds me out when people like taxidermy their dead pets or whatever. Like that weirds me out.
Yeah.
Because it's not like they're not going to. It's not a good memory of them where it's like, oh, yes, I remember he just stood there motionless in the corner for like 5 years.
You. Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. Although, I mean, I kind of agree with you though in the whole thing. It's pretty fascinating, and it's kind of a neat way to preserve something that's so beautiful. You might not be able to see up close, like the birds. You know, they just fly on by. You don't see them. But to try to preserve a pet is...
It's a little weird to me, but like overall, it's an interesting thing. I'm not against it.
Yeah. Not to put down anybody who.
Yeah, of course. That's just what came to my mind when I read about it. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a thing. Okay. The next major trips the Roosevelts took was in 1870 through 1871. It kind of overlapped through the new year, I guess. It was in the Mediterranean, which, as well as like countries like along that, Egypt and Syria and Greece and whatever. And the thing that separated this trip from the last trip is that Theodore enjoyed it. He loved being in the Mediterranean. He collected a lot more birds, whatever. He was like, it was like this area is cool. I like this. I don't know if he disliked Europe so much as it was just he was older then and could appreciate it more. Well, later that same year, Theodore, he went on a solo venture to Maine to, I don't know, I guess it was just to like have a venture on his own or to, man up a bit or whatever.
So he was about 13 though, you said?
Around that time,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's young to be on his own, but times are different.
Yeah.
And maybe he was going to visit an aunt or something.
Maybe. I don't know. Well, on the train ride there, some older boys started to harass him due to his appearance because he's a skinny, asthmatic kid with glasses. It's like, we can beat up this guy. I don't know if they beat him up. They bothered him.
Yeah.
And he was very much like, he was upset about the whole encounter. So when he came home, he told his dad the whole story, and his dad gave him some life advice. Toughen up. Well, okay, it was more along the lines of you need to be stronger physically in order to defend yourself, but I read it as toughen up.
But which is more like an emotional thing. If you say toughen up, and toughen up as far as build, get stronger, that's a practical advice.
Yeah.
But you think it was more of the emotional?
Well, no, I'm just thinking that I think there's just different ways of saying the same thing.
Okay.
Well, what his dad did, and this is how you know his dad's rich, he hired a prize fighter to teach Theodore how to box.
Oh, my goodness.
So this was a start.
As if the trips to Europe didn't give it away.
Yeah, so this was the start of a lifelong mission to improve Theodore's body. He was like a health nut later on in life. So he was doing daily exercising, he was weightlifting, he was doing all sorts of stuff.
It's cool when you can look back and pinpoint a moment in your life that you decided to make a change.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was the goal of the family for Theodore to go to Harvard, which is a bit ambitious, all things considered. Like, sure, they were upper class and they had money, but he had been homeschooled this whole time, and he was pretty bad at math, which, again, I relate to. So they hired a tutor to help in that regard, and 2 years later, in 1875 or so, he passed the entrance exam to Harvard.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, just to say this, because you probably don't have any idea, but back in that time, a lot of people were homeschooled compared to now. Well, actually, yeah, compared to now.
Okay.
I think it was more common, but that doesn't mean, I don't know. My brain is just wondering about statistics getting to Harvard and stuff like that, which is not. I don't know the
statistics of it. I didn't think to look.
And I wouldn't have expected you to. It was just curious. Just my brain.
Sure. No, it's fine. Like with a lot of things, we look at historical context. There's a lot of potentially relevant stuff that slips under the radar because it's would not be related, but it is somehow because that's how life works.
Yeah.
Well, in college, he blossomed very much so. He started making like friends, like proper friends. And he got to a point where he joined some of the college societies that were going on there, He partook in boxing tournaments, a rowing competition, some political parades and debates. He loved debates. Again, I relate. And he would get into them all the time with other students, with his professors. Just, unfortunately, the good times, as always, they come to an end. It was in his sophomore year, they found out his dad was very sick.
Uh-oh.
So he went back home to be with him, and his dad's health did begin to kind of improve a while. So cool. Theodore's like, all right, okay, cool. So he went back to Harvard, and soon after that, his dad died.
Oh,
Which is very tragic.
it is, because it seems like he was a nice and supportive dad.
Yeah, he did. Well, as you can imagine, this was all very depressing on Theodore, because I think he was very close to his dad. Though he kept it bottled up. He tried to overcome his grief by hiking, which helped, but he was very kind of stoic about it. Which you find, if you look through like his life, he was like, he did that with a lot of grief. He kind of just like
dealt with it on his own.
Shoulder on,
yeah.
So 1879, he met Alice Lee, whom he would later go on to marry the next year, which is kind of seems like a bit of a whirlwind romance to me, but I guess times might have been different then or whatever.
Yeah. Your dad and I were married within a year of meeting each other too.
See, and look how that turned out. Right.
Actually, I apologize. It was a year and 2 months.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to listen to this, so you're fine. Now, he married her around the time he graduated Harvard, to put that in kind of context. And soon after that, he enrolled in Columbia University for a law degree. He was a busy boy, because while he was doing this, he was also working at his uncle's law firm. And
helps to have connections.
Yeah, it was also around this time that he wrote a book on the War of 1812. He would go on to write like a couple books, I think.
Wow.
But I thought it was relevant to mention because that's interesting.
That is cool.
It was like he was looking for like a book on the subject. He couldn't find one that he liked. So I was like, I'll just write my own.
Wow.
And in 1881, the couple, they took a summer trip to Europe. And while they were in Switzerland, he climbed the Matterhorn, which, in case you don't know, or any of our listeners don't know, it's a kind of famous mountain in that area.
Yeah, and sorry to interject, but I believe there's a Matterhorn at Disneyland, Disney World, roller coaster ride.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. See, I never been, so I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
And it was on this trip that I guess he was doing some soul searching or whatever, but he decided not to go into law and instead go into politics.
Oh, wow.
So, which, I mean, he was already interested in, of course, but I guess he just decided that was more his field.
Wow.
Needless to say, all the stuff we've been talking about, like his whole life up to this point, shows how much of a character this guy was. And keep that in mind when we get into like his political career and like people's reactions to him. Because he was very much this outspoken, always had his mind. He was very bold, and he went from like this asthmatic nature boy to like this full grown grizzly bear of a man nature boy, or whatever.
That's really cool. So remind me what his age was about this time, or the year when he decided to go into politics.
He was like in his early 30s or so.
Okay.
Late 20s, early 30s, something like that.
Okay.
Around that time. I don't know the exact, but you have to understand at the time, people saw politics in a slightly different light than we do now. I mean, it was still a lot of the same bickering and division and whatnot, of course, because that's always going to be the thing. But believe it or not, if you're a higher class, wealthy person, politics was seen as beneath you. Like that's not, that's for the scrubs, I've got
that's interesting.
Yeah, which I don't really get, but I guess it was just the time, the attitude.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm. So this decision of his to be like, I'm going to go into politics. His friends and family kind of were understandably, they had some skepticism about it, and concern. Like, is this smart? I don't know if this is the right choice for you to do. Regardless of that whole disagreement, he ended up joining the Republican Party. He always kind of did what he wanted, I guess. He was like, no, I'm doing this. I've set my sights on it. He was really stubborn in that sense, and really kind of like and we'll get more into it, but when he was invested in something, he threw his whole person into that thing, which I can see the problems with that from just like a mental health standpoint, but I kind of admire that. I think that's kind of a cool thing.
I think that's a great trait to have for a leader.
Yeah, no, I think so too. Well, when he put his head on something, he usually succeeded, like I said, and he quickly got the party's nomination for a New York State Assembly seat, because remember, he's from New York City, which he won. Now, both parties didn't think too much of him. his attitude and sense of dress was entirely different from like everyone else. It's like this weird rich guy who thinks he's a cowboy or something like that.
That's funny.
Yeah, he's just this.
He seemed a little out of place to them. Yeah, an outsider or something.
Yeah, a little out of place. But this didn't dissuade him though, because of course it didn't, because he's Theodore Roosevelt and he does what he wants. So in terms of his own politics, they kind of reflect in himself and his own view of stuff. Which I think they should. He believed that the individual was in charge of their own fate, though he also knew that the people who had money and power often made the system unfair for like the little guy, and they had more opportunities, either intentionally or just that's just how the system worked. So he wanted to make it easier for all Americans to be able to find success on their own accord and stuff.
Wow. You're going through this so well. You're putting it together so well. And I'm just like pausing and thinking about him. And so he has already in his young life overcome asthma and, getting strong. And he's seen himself, the successes he's had when you put your mind to something like getting stronger or whatever, you can overcome it. But he also, like I said, he had the position with his uncle at the law firm, and it's like, okay, well that's something that comes with privilege because somebody who, so it's really cool for him to be so self-aware and then step down, to politics to try to influence. To
recognize that, the difference between my own accomplishments and I come from a wealthy background and that helped, to be able to tell that difference where I don't know if everyone would be able to. Just like, well, I did it, you can do it too. But he's like, well, no, that doesn't entirely work like that because there are other factors at play. Well, in 1883, he won his third term in the New York State Assembly, and a few months later, his wife gave birth to a daughter, which is good news. But unfortunately, not long after that, he lost both his wife and mother to illness.
Oh, no.
Right. They died around the same time.
Oh, no.
And in his diary, he wrote, "The light has gone from my life," which is very sad.
Oh. That does take someone right out of you.
Yeah, so he took a few days to grieve. Then he returned.
A few days.
Yeah, just in like isolation. He's like, I don't want to do any work. I don't want to, just let it out. And then he returned to finish his term. He left his daughter with his sister for her to take care of, just because while he was away. Now, even though a good number of people were turned off by himself, other people really liked him. They're really interesting because he was brass. He was uncompromising. This like, oh, hey, I can see this guy as like a leader or something. There are people in politics that were like, actually, I like that guy. He's cool or whatever. However, after the dual tragedy of, the loss in his family, he needed some time away from all that to kind of recover fully, so he went on a hiatus, and in 1884, he retired to a ranch that he had bought in North Dakota.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
That's quite a difference from New York City.
Yes. Fun fact, this next section in my notes, I have titled Cowboy Years. So just as like a fun side note. The locals of Medora, which was the town that his ranch was near, they also thought he was a goof, so to speak, because, again, this soft, rich guy comes in to play cowboy. He does no respect or knowledge of the ranching life, all that stuff. Well, after people got to know him and his general, like, badassness, if you'll pardon the term, they kind of began to respect him more because they realized, oh, no, this guy's actually, like, has been outdoors before. He knows kind of how to do this stuff, kind of, and he learned quickly and all that. He was invested. He had some more people to help out along the ranch, but because it's a big thing. But if accounts are to be believed, he pulled his own weight, so to say. Like he was out there helping them and working with them and stuff. And to give an example of him being awesome, once, a few years into this kind of period of his life, he had caught some thieves stealing a boat. I don't know why he'd steal a boat, but he caught some thieves doing that. So he single-handedly captured them and went on a 3-day journey to the sheriff, to the town, with them in tow.
Oh my gosh.
And throughout this whole time, he never slept. He just kept his eyes on them, his gun on them, like constantly.
Wow.
Which is terrifying. If you heard this random guy try to steal a boat and then suddenly this like crazy guy comes out. But
that was quite a feat.
Right.
Because I'm sure they were sleeping and he's here trying. Wow.
Yeah. So what
that
a
is pretty awesome.
Right? Well, in life, all things come to an end, as you know. And he ended up losing half his livestock to the winter of 1886, 1887, like that time.
Wow.
Which, from the sounds of it, was a particularly bad winter. So he's like, all right, that was fun. I think I've I think it's time for me to come back to the East Coast. So he did. He married again, this time to a woman named Edith Carroll, and the two of them would end up having 5 kids.
Wow.
Like over the course of that. So he's back in New York. He's back, in his old stomping grounds. The Republican leaders really wanted him back in politics, specifically to run for mayor of New York City. And he was like, ain't no thing but chicken win. My words, not his. And despite not having much of a chance of winning, he put his whole effort into it. And to be fair, he did pretty well. He got 3rd place, which was 27% of the vote or so.
It's not bad.
Not too shabby. Yeah. And when he lost that, though, he decided his whole politics thing wasn't really working out. He's like, it's not really for me, I guess, So because he was having like some mixed kind of success, failure, it wasn't like...
he doesn't sound like somebody who could handle failure very well.
Yeah. So he focused attention on writing, and he ended up writing a book named The Winning of the West, which I haven't read and I didn't read about because I was just like, oh, that's interesting. Moving on.
Yeah.
I think it might be about his time in North Dakota, but I could be wrong.
I bet that's really interesting.
Yeah. So in 1888, he never really kind of left his interest in politics. Benjamin Harrison was running for president at the time, so he started giving speeches on his behalf, being like, hey, this guy's cool. Maybe consider voting for him. And if you know anything about Benjamin Harrison, you know that he did eventually win the race.
I recognize the last name. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, President Harrison was persuaded by those who were fans of Roosevelt to appoint him to the U.S. Civil Service Commission. And Roosevelt, he took to it like he did to anything, with a fierce can-do attitude and persistent stubbornness. Especially since this was like his chance to try to even the playing field for the common man, which is kind of, his whole thing, and fight corruption, because he was very much not for that.
And it was the civil what?
The U.S. Civil Service Commission.
Civil Service, okay.
By 1894, he was appointed president of the board of New York City Police Commissioners.
Wow.
It's a long title, but basically like what it sounds like, And he went around in that position trying to improve the police force, get rid of corruption, having more strict rules for recruitment. Love this guy, by the way, because I feel like that's a good thing to have. Not to be too topical, of course, but I think we all know how bad it can get if the police aren't held accountable for potential corruption.
Yeah. And if you reach back, like if you look back across the span of history, law enforcement, quote unquote law enforcement, when from like the dark ages, like how awful it can be for people who are in power unchecked.
Yeah. And to misuse that. Yes, absolutely. So 3 years later, the president, he made Roosevelt the assistant secretary of the Navy, and he became a strong advocate for increasing the Navy's size. Because, of course, at the time, the Navies aren't as, I guess, relevant nowadays. But at the time, that was like a big defense military thing.
I'm sure people who are in the Navy probably think it's pretty relevant.
No, it is. It is. But I mean, it's not as relevant,
Right.
Then the Spanish-American Wars happened. Do you know about this?
In the 1890s? Are you in the 1890s or what years?
I was like 1890, I'm pretty sure.
This is a time when he got the Rough Riders together, right? And it was this was when Cuba was trying to get independence and Spain fighting in Cuba.
So basically, it's a kind of a complicated affair.
It's actually related to our Ybor City episode.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
What happened was that Cuba was having a whole war of independence thing going on from Spain. America sent the USS Maine to protect American interests because Cuba is like right in our backyard. However, the ship exploded in Havana Harbor, and Spain was blamed. We don't know for sure what the cause was. It's a matter of debate among historians. But
that's awful to have that kind of question mark in history.
Yeah.
Still don't know what happened to that ship.
Well, it exploded. We just don't know the cause. Regardless, Spain was blamed by America. So we went to war for a time. There's a lot more to it. It's just like an explanation for those who don't know what that was.
Right.
It only lasted a few months. So at least our involvement in it lasted a few months. So that's why we usually don't hear about it, I guess, because it was kind of more of a blip on the radar of history as opposed to like World War II or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
Enter Theodore Roosevelt. And remember, he was like the assistant secretary to the Navy. So when the Maine blew up, he had a bunch of new ships built. And once war was declared, he resigned and formed the first U.S. Volunteer Cavalry Regiment.
Wow.
Which the press dubbed the Rough Riders.
Wow. So they were all just all volunteers.
Yeah. So they trained for a bit in San Antonio, and then they went to Cuba to help in the war. I kind of, for the sake of time, I kind of skipped a lot of like
because that would be a whole
that's a whole
thing. Yeah.
But needless to say, he showed a lot of bravery and courage and helped turn the tide in some battles and stuff. So, the public, it really increased his reputation because he's like, oh, this guy, he ain't no like armchair politician saying other people to fight and die in his wars. He's like, no, I'm there. I'm on the front lines, So that's cool.
Wow.
After the war, he decided to run for governor of New York, which he won, but only barely. As governor, he was very open and passionate about standing for the rights of the underprivileged, and was also very much against monopolies and for ecological preservation. And I love this guy because like a lot of stuff, I'm like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
I said, I don't agree with everything he said, but a lot of his stuff he's for. I'm like, yeah, no, I hear that. That's it's not a terrible idea. So 1900, new century, and it was a rough run at that, but that's not here nor there. The brass of the Republican Party, they wanted Roosevelt to try for the, at the time, vacant vice presidential spot in the upcoming presidential election.
Vacant vice president.
Sorry,
no, I know that it's confusing because I'm thinking now somebody who's running for president chooses a running mate, but I know in the past. And by the way, this is coming, I think, from the Hamilton musical.
Yeah, it's
it used to be.
How do you finish?
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's fine.
Somebody gets elected president, and like whoever was second in line gets to be vice president, or whoever was like the runner-up.
Yeah, that's not the case at this point.
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure how that went. And the source I was looking at, I was like, he went for vice president. Cool. I'm like, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
I guess it was just a different system or slightly different than.
Okay.
Regardless.
We'll take that at face value.
We'll take it at face value. It's fine. Don't worry about it. He responded with a kind of like, I guess, okay. My word's not his, whatever. We're just having fun. Something like that. As they would have it, he won he became William McKinley's vice president, like the Republican nomination. They're like, okay, cool. We're okay with you being vice president. As you have learned by now, when he becomes invested in something, he throws all of it into it, as I've said. So he made more than 400 speeches across 23 states.
Wow.
Kind of like gaining support, drawing support.
That's a ton.
Yeah, and they won. William McKinley became the 25th president on March 1st, 1901. Theodore Roosevelt became vice president. And I have a question for you. Do you know what the most memorable thing about President McKinley is?
What I can really think of is Mount McKinley.
Okay, I didn't think about that.
Let me think. The most about his presidency.
Well, McKinley. I mean, if you don't immediately know it, then you don't know.
I don't know.
He was assassinated.
No kidding.
Yeah, he.
Isn't it terrible that I don't even know that?
Mm-hmm. He was.
I don't even know if he was a good president or.
I don't know.
Somebody didn't think so.
No, he was shot by an anarchist named Leon. Pull his last name. I don't know how to say it. It's got like 2 Z's in it.
Okay.
Kozlgs? I don't know.
It's okay.
Whatever. I butchered it. Sorry. Whatever. He was shot by an anarchist, and 6 months after the election.
Oh my!
So not too far into it. He was, by the way, the 3rd president to be assassinated after Lincoln and James A. Garfield.
My gosh.
And that was how Theodore Roosevelt became president.
I had no idea.
He wasn't elected.
I thought he was elected. I was waiting for, and then he ran for president.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So
he only served out that one term?
Well, we're going to get to it.
Okay. But that's fascinating, though. Gosh, thanks for teaching me.
Yeah. You learn something new every day there. You're smarter already.
Learned about 15 things today already.
So he was 42 years old at the time. He holds the record currently for the youngest president.
Still.
Yeah. And as president, he put on his good old determination and stubbornness so that when the next election came, because he wanted to be able to win on his own term, like a second term, I guess. He wanted people to, he wanted to be elected legitimately, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, not by default.
Yeah, and not through some tragic circumstance. So he created as president, some of the stuff he did, I should just say, preface that, he created 44 antitrust suits, which resulted in breaking up of like Northern security companies and putting a lot of regulatory controls on Standard Oil. If all that sounds confusing, don't worry about it. Basically, he was breaking up some monopolies, which is good because monopolies are bad for free market.
Yeah.
Yeah. His main focus, at least what seemed to be his main focus, who knows, other than he was pretty outspoken. So I guess we all know, was on conservation.
Did he form the Conservation Corps?
I don't know if he.
Sorry.
I don't know if he formed that in particular, but what he did do is he made 5 natural parks. He created the United States Forest Service, and he put 230 million acres of land under public protection.
Wow.
So he was very passionate about that. In regards to international affairs, he's actually got some, not flag, well, I guess flag. Some people think he's a little too imperialistic and like how he handled some of these international stuff was fair enough. But in terms of good things he did, at least, he got involved with the Russo-Japanese War, which was a whole thing. Basically, this is a whole different topic entirely. Yeah. Russo went to war briefly with Japan because they wanted to try to smooth tensions in their own country, because this is in the lead up to their revolution, but that's still a ways off. And they got soundly defeated by Japan because they underestimated it, and it was a big embarrassment for them. Anyways, that's that. For that particular conflict, he helped with the Treaty of Portsmouth, which not only ended the war, but won him a Nobel Peace Prize.
Wow.
Yeah.
So everybody agreed that was a good thing.
Yeah, because he ended a war.
That's awesome. That's always a good thing. That's always a good. Not hard to agree on that.
Yeah. And the Panama Canal?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was his doing as well.
That was him?
Yeah. So it was a 1903 deal. He made Panama to make a large, well, for a person it's large. They actually have a picture of it. It's actually quite small canal that goes straight through the country.
Which was great, because before that weren't we having to go people were having to go all the way around South America.
Yeah, all the way like near Antarctica, basically, to get from the Atlantic to Pacific or vice versa. And Panama, for those who don't know geography, is like the narrowest part of the supercontinent. If you're going to cut through it, that would be the easiest way to do it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that really helped, like, just from a global perspective, like trade and all that. 1904, next presidential election, right? Theodore Roosevelt, obviously, he's running for a second term, as we've established. And of course, his opponent was the Democrat Alton Brooks Parker, who was a New York politician. He wasn't like, I don't think he was like super big, but, he was involved. And to Parker's credit, he did have support. He still lost, but Roosevelt won 56% of the popular vote. Wow. So it was very close.
Yeah.
The Electoral College was a little more on his side with 336 out of 476 votes.
Wow.
Hopefully it's not too confusing for people who don't know how American elections work.
Because that's
basically he won, but it was close. That's what the takeaway from that. So
it really seems like he did a lot of good things. Well, I know you hit the highlights of the good things he did, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah. During his second term, he pushed for like 8-hour work days among some other, at least at the time, kind of radical ideas that the House wasn't having. They're like, no, we're not. No, we're not signing off on some of these ideas. His policies is interesting. His policies were kind of slightly away from the Republican Party's policies at the time. Or maybe it was the Republican Party's policies are slightly away from his. Either way, there was that bit of split going on. And some controversy kind of from that, because it's like, you changed, or maybe they changed, and whatever. That's how it goes, like not to get off on the side thing, of course, but the Democrat Party and Republican Party of the 1800s are not the Democrats and Republicans of today. They've changed quite a bit. At the time, you can have more than 2 terms. There wasn't any rule on the books. It was tradition to have 2, thanks to George Washington, because that was his count, but you didn't have to. Theodore Roosevelt decided not to go for a third time, not because he was like burned out so much as he thought that 2 terms was running the risk of turning into a dictator. Which I don't know if that's true, but the fact that he had that concern was pretty good. I feel like. And funny enough, his cousin Franklin Delano Roosevelt had 4 terms, and was the only one to kind of go beyond 2, and he's the reason why they like, okay, we need to make it a rule that you can't just
none of this
winning.
Unspoken stuff. We need to put this on paper.
Yeah.
So 4 terms is a lot. That seems outrageous.
It's a massive amount of time.
Yeah.
So soon after he left office in 1909, he went on a safari in Africa on behalf of the Smithsonian, bringing
cool.
back animals. Because he's like this kind of adventurer dude, right? And it was a success. They got 11,400 specimens, ranging from some insects or bugs or whatever.
That's such a big number.
Yeah, to I think at least 1 elephant. I don't know.
Wow.
It's crazy stuff. Now, upon coming back home, he elected a new president, which was William Howard Taft, the rotund one, if you will. And he wasn't too happy. Taft, at least in Roosevelt's mind, was too conservative. He was making the Republican Party too conservative. Again, according to Roosevelt, it's hard to kind of define what too conservative is sometimes. But so there's some friction there. You know, he wasn't too happy with kind of the state of where his party was heading. So in the 1912 presidential election, Roosevelt ran against him in a Republican primary.
Wow.
Right? He's like, I'm coming back.
Yeah.
That didn't work out. However, Taft still won the primary. And to be fair, from what I've heard, it's pretty difficult to win against an incumbent president. Like that president has to be
of the same party.
Yeah. That president has to be very unpopular for that to happen, from my understanding. Not to be too topical. I'm just saying. Well, Theodore Roosevelt, he was like, fine, be that way. Again, my words, not his. And he left the Republican Party and formed the Progressive Party. Then he ran for president as an independent. He made a lot of passive speeches, his typical bold nature. And this is where something happened that cemented his legacy as a total badass, if you'll pardon the term. October 14th, 1912. Roosevelt, he's in Milwaukee. He's giving a speech. Suddenly, a shot rings out. He's been shot.
Oh my gosh.
Specifically in the chest.
He keeps giving the speech.
Yeah.
I must have heard that somewhere.
The glasses case and then his very thick speech pamphlet that he had written out. But he's like, nah, I want to use that out. So he basically chased down this guy, had a hand over to authorities, and then he continued his speech like nothing had happened.
Oh my gosh.
Like, how tough is that guy, right?
How fortunate is he too that it didn't actually pierce him. Oh my gosh.
There's a famous quote that he said, like immediately after this, in the speech, he's like, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot, but it takes more than that to kill a bull moose.
That's awesome. Oh my gosh. Wow.
No, he was a crazy man. By the way, the bullet stayed in his body for the rest of his life. So
wow.
Yeah.
Just must have been just in his chest somewhere.
Yeah, like it all that stuff slowed it down so it didn't hit his heart, but it got lodged in there.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, as you might already know, the 1912 election, I don't know if you know this or not, it was won by neither Roosevelt nor Taft. It was won by Woodrow Wilson, who was a Democrat. We have a whole episode on him because he's a very divisive and interesting figure in himself, but we won't do that, at least not now. Though, to give an idea of how divisive it was, Wilson won with only 42% of the popular vote. But despite not winning the race, Roosevelt still beat Taft 27% and 23%. So there's that.
Yeah, that's one of those elections that makes you okay. And if he hadn't run as an independent, Taft might have been president.
Maybe.
I mean, some stuff like that.
It happens all the time.
Change history completely.
Yeah, no, it happens all the time. Votes get tangled up in other candidates and stuff. It's like, it's a whole thing.
So interesting.
By the way, Wilson was the president during World War I.
Yes, actually, that's what I was thinking. And when I was thinking how different history might have been, and I don't really know anything much about World War I, except I did know. I did know that only because I used to teach citizenship classes.
Sure. So a year later, well, on a South American expedition, because of course he was on one, because he's Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore got sick. He got an affected leg wound, and I guess it wasn't treated properly or whatever. So he returned to the States, but he was still pretty ill. And for the next few years, he was sick. He was in pain. He kept getting bouts of malaria. It was a rough gig. Well, on January 6, 1919, was when he died in his sleep.
Wow.
Some blood clot in his lungs had suffocated him or whatever.
Wow.
And he was 60 years old.
Wow. What a full life.
Yes. One of my favorite presidents, I got to say. I don't agree with everything he did or stood for, because I never do with any of these people.
Well, you've painted a pretty likable picture of a guy who is bold, stands for what he believes in, and tries to pull other people in what he thinks is the right direction.
Yeah,
So,
Whether you agree with that direction is, I guess, a matter of debate, but it is, I think, admirable to kind of stand up for what you believe in. As well as just being an interesting character in his own right, even putting aside what he stood for.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. Just the fact that the things that he had to overcome. And I liked, for example, that he moved to North Dakota.
Yeah.
Seemed totally out of the blue. And sure, he had experience going in, to the country from New York or whatever. But I mean, that's a whole different to become a rancher. So he had to
That's a learning curve.
Yeah, he had to really embrace learning new things and be okay not knowing things and just be willing to learn. Because a lot of times we shut doors to opportunity because we're like, oh, I don't know how to do that, or I'm not familiar with this or whatever. And, we paint ourselves into a pretty small box.
Yes.
Because we're not willing to do new things. So I like that about him.
We find our comfort zone
Yeah.
and we stay in there and we
Right.
don't like to leave. But I think not only is it really admirable, I think it's very courageous to
Totally.
be like, no, I want to go into the unknown. I want to see what's there. I want to experience it. I want to explore.
Yeah, I think that's awesome
really
too.
Cool. He was a bit divisive in his time, but today he's widely considered one of our better presidents. Like historians rank him within like the top 5 or something like that.
Wow.
Progressives like him because of his proposals about labor reforms and direct federal taxation and stuff like that. Conservatives like him because he had military values and served, and he was really kind of focused on law and order and stuff like that. And of course, conservationists love this guy.
Yeah. So it's almost like everybody could find something about him that they
people,
like.
Yeah.
I guess most people would be more accurate.
I think some socialists and libertarians don't care for him too much. But other than that, I think most people like the guy. He was one of the first presidents, if not the first president, to have his voice recorded for prosperity. A few of his speeches survive. Like you can find them online.
That's so cool.
Like recordings of his speeches. He also, in 2005, he had an asteroid named after him.
Oh, that's cool.
Yep. 188693 Roosevelt.
Oh, that's so cool.
It sounds kind of like a street, but whatever.
It does. Sounds like an address. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to talk about him because he's super interesting. I think he's one of he's a very influential president that I think he often gets overshadowed by what comes after, so to speak, and the, in public memory, and their eyes, usually they don't think back to a century ago or over a century ago.
Before the world wars.
Yeah. Usually they're like, oh yeah, I know presidents, Jimmy Carter. The Bushes, stuff in like recent memory.
Yeah.
So I just thought, hey, it'd be interesting to talk about. And
I loved it.
Yeah. And
I loved it. I could tell
some stuff.
You put a lot of work into that,
Yes.
and there's a lot to say about him. And you've really made this 2D old president really like come to life. So that was really, really interesting. Thank you for that.
Of course. Yeah. So next time, I guess.
So what's good are we looking forward to next time?
Next time, it's going to be a little bit of a, not experiment, that's the wrong word, a bit of a special episode, I guess. And that makes it sound like I'm going to be talking about like drug use or something. It isn't, it's not that type of special episode. Basically, we had this grand idea to have it might be on the shorter side, which is fine.
Yeah.
Kind of, how would you say it? Like, not introduction, but like,
yeah, kind of. Introduction seems like it's not quite the right word because we're on episode 34, but something that gives a little bit more of information about who we are, what we do.
So what we're going to do, unless we change our minds in the production of this, which is possible, but as it stands, what we're going to do is you, my lovely co-host, are going to ask me a bunch of questions about myself, and I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions about you.
That's right. And hopefully in the process, the audience will get to know us a little bit better. Of course, we know each other pretty darn well.
So, and after that, we would turn to history stuff, obviously.
Yeah.
Yes.
A little bit messy, but that's all right.
That's fine. Life's a little messy.
Yeah. All right, listeners. So we hope to hear from you about the intro and outro. We hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as I have enjoyed this episode, and Jacob enjoyed researching it. Right?
Yes. No, it was good.
It was a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Confucius once said, "Study the past if you would define the future." You've been listening to the History Slices podcast with Jacob and Rachel. We hope you've gotten some useful information from the show. We hope we made you think, and we hope you were entertained. We know we had fun, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with us on Facebook at History Slices and on Instagram at History Slices Podcast. Make sure to like, rate, and review the show, and tell a friend about the show. That'll help us out too. One more quote before we go from Michael Crichton. If you don't know history, then you don't know anything. You are a leaf that doesn't know it's part of a tree. Till next time, this is History Slices. signing off.